Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Susan McGuire, Director of Professional Development at ACCE. I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar, which will be presented by Mark Eagan, CCE, President and CEO of the Capital Region Chamber, Michael Huber, President and CEO of the Indy Chamber, and Jeff Ray, CCE, President and CEO of the South Bend Regional Chamber. Also with us here today is my colleague, Jen Pack, who is ACCE's resource manager, and she's going to spend a few minutes at the end of the webinar pointing out resources and information that we have here at ACCE on mergers and partnerships. So the COVID-19 crisis has obviously encouraged many chamber leaders to consider alliances and mergers. And Mark, Michael, and Jeff are going to share how their intentional approaches to creating focused, productive, and mission-driven teams have led to successful new organizations. So before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping reminders. First, attendees are in listen-only mode during the webinar to avoid background noise. Second, after the presentation, we will have time for questions, and you can ask questions by clicking on the question box in the right-hand side of your screen on the webinar panel. Just open that box and type in your question. You should feel free to type in your questions when they come to you during the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. We'll just go ahead and take the questions at the end, but we welcome your questions and look forward to a good conversation. Let me see here. If we run out of time and don't get to your questions, one of us will contact you, so no worries about that. The presentation slides are also uploaded to the webinar panel on the right-hand side. Click on the box labeled handouts and then just click to download. If you prefer to download the presentation slides afterwards, I will post them along with the webinar recording. And then finally, the webinar is being recorded. It will be posted on our ACCE webinar page, most likely by tomorrow, but no later than Monday, December 7th, along with the presentation slides. So with that, I'm going to pass the things over to Jen Pack, who will introduce our panelists.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Susan. First, we have Mark Eagan, CCE, who serves as President and CEO of the Capital Regional Chamber and the Center for Economic Growth, which is an 8-county regional economic development organization. He previously held chamber executive posts at Mansfield and Brockton, Massachusetts, and in South Bend, Indiana. He served as chairman of ACCE in 2008 and 2009, and has also chaired ACCE's Foundation and Certified Chamber Executive Commission. He's past chair of the Institute for Organization Management Board of Regents and has taught at several institute sites. Michael Huber serves as president and CEO of the Indy Chamber, a position he's held since 2013. In this role, he oversees the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce and regional economic development efforts. Michael's prior experience includes a 3-year stint as Indianapolis Deputy Mayor for Economic Development, and he stays active playing and producing music. Jeff Ray, CCE, is the current president and CEO of the South Bend, Indiana Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Greater Niles Chamber of Commerce. In those roles, Jeff represents the interests of more than 1,300 member businesses who employ close to 70,000 people in this 2-state, 3-county region. The South Bend Regional Chamber is a combined Chamber Economic Development Visitors Bureau organization. The Greater Niles Chamber is a combined Chamber Economic Development organization. Ray is a frequent speaker, trainer, facilitator, and commentator, columnist, and also host of a weekly local television station. And with that, we'll turn it over to Mark first.
Thanks, Jen, and good afternoon, everybody. And it's good to join my colleagues, Michael and Jeff. I think I'm going to start when you think about culture. You have to think about culture now. You can't wait until later, because I think the structure you create should be created based on that culture. And you see our organizational chart, and I'll get to that a little bit more. But cultures of chambers and cultures of communities is often what prevents affiliations and mergers from occurring. So maybe just I'll spend a couple of minutes, provide some background on our structure. So first of all, I'm in Albany, New York, where our MSA is 4 counties with a population of just under 900,000 people. I was recruited here in 2008, so 12 years ago. I was hired by the Albany Colony Regional Chamber. At one point, that was a county chamber that had become regional in the 1990s. But because it had been at one time a county chamber, oftentimes it was still viewed that way, and didn't realize that, again, it wasn't a membership grab to become regional, but it was a recognition that we were truly a regional economy. And to that point, when I was interviewing for the position, the search committee brought it up and said that undeniably these 4 counties are economically tied to each other. But because of parochial thinking, that's often what was going to hold us back from achieving our true potential. So when I came to the community, I really sought out organizations who wanted to work together. And it was obvious the organizations that did and the organizations that didn't. Oftentimes when you're the larger organization, some other organizations want to shy away from it. They're afraid of what might happen. So I let that be, and I worked with the organizations who wanted to work with us. And one of them in particular, that was a county chamber within the 4 counties, we kept doing more and more collaborations. And we had a number of our initiatives that were truly shared initiatives with staffing, and et cetera. And it got to the point that we realized there was only so much we could do that way. Was there an opportunity for some bold leadership to create a platform to not just bring together these chambers, but bring together down the road, hopefully other like-minded organizations. So that's how we created, the structure that you see here. We created an umbrella organization. So from a legal perspective, as you see the chart here, and you see the Chamber of Schenectady County and the Albany Colony Regional Chamber, they created the Capital Region Chamber. Because one of the things as we went through the discussions on potential affiliation and cultures, because the Albany Chamber was already regional, because it was in the capital city, because it was much larger in staff and budget, Schenectady felt like they maybe were going to get lost. Their identity would be lost. Ultimately, they weren't going to matter. So we said, let's create a platform that makes it clear that we really are about the entire region. Get rid of that mindset that the Albany Chamber was based in at one time as a county organization. We realized through that, again, I don't want to get into the weeds too much. So any of you like this model, I can talk to you offline afterwards. So we actually created, so these entities that you see in these boxes on the screen are actually, believe it or not, all legal entities. We have limited governance with all of them. The primary governance goes to the box on the top, the regional organization. But part of keeping that was so folks wouldn't feel that they lost something. They didn't lose their chamber, they gained something. But the membership of a chamber, because we believe that we're a region, you can't join a local chamber. You can only join the regional organization of the Capital Region Chamber. Again, thinking about cultures, we knew it was important that our staff were not siloed. So as staffs came together, and even as we kept multiple offices, and we still have multiple offices, no staff is assigned to a community or a county. All of our staff service the entire region. And we actually have different departments that are based in those offices. So again, we knew a physical presence was important, but that staff services our membership and our community in the broader sense. Same thing from the volunteer side. As we looked at structure, we really tried to say, how do we act regionally but honor local? How do we make sure that those programs that people valued the most, that we retain those? So particularly in that smaller community I talked about, they had a couple of signature events that were really important to them. So we've kept those events. And when we do those events, we present them at the name of the local affiliate chamber versus the regional organization. And when you're there, in many cases, it feels that same culture. You also have to be intentional. So part of us bringing that staff together like that was so we couldn't be in silos. And we found ways to create cross-pollinated teams to work on projects as we were coming together. And even now, of course, COVID is a different situation, but even before that, when we were based in multiple offices, we made sure we always acted as one team. You know, one phone system, one computer infrastructure. We would find ways to get together, not just for full staff meetings, but whether it was, you know, painting pumpkins in the fall or whatever it was, to make sure that we worked as a team. So that structure was created in 2015. And our goal was to build a better model that hopefully would be a magnet to eventually attract other organizations. We never want to go out and seek other organizations, but if we were going to truly function for the economic benefit of this 4-county region, how can we get more like-minded organizations to come together? I'm happy to say about a year ago, we had another chamber that affiliated that you can see again on the screen, the Chamber of Southern Saratoga County. And then actually just a couple of months ago, we had our Regional Economic Development Organization, which is actually an 8-county organization. While the chamber focuses on 4 counties, you might be aware that oftentimes larger metro chambers have a broader geographic area for economic development. So by having 2 more affiliations since that time, I think proves that the model can work. But it works because a lot of hard work that went into the planning. And then every day you have to remember that the little things matter. You know, you have to be present. So at that beginning stages, it was important that I made sure that the staff in all the offices knew that I was there for them, you know, physically being present in the office. Those, you know, I have to say I've put a lot more miles on my car because those events that are in the community to make sure that they realize that they're not second fiddle. So culture is so important. And I don't think you can ever lose focus on it, even though we're now 5 years in. Some things are easier, but some things remain just as challenging. But again, to my earlier comment, it's those little things that often matter the most. So I'll leave it for that and open to your questions as we get further into our workshop today.
All right, well, thank you, Mark. And I think next up we have Michael.
Thank you, Susan and Jen. It's great to be here with Mark and Jeff. Just you know, I've been here 7 years and it still feels like I'm new. Mark and Jeff are definitely in my top 10 most admired chamber executives. Were incredibly helpful right when I started, and I've learned a lot from both of them, seeing how they lead their organizations. A lot of parallels, obviously, between our markets and the way that we're structured. And we know that, you know, these mergers. I'm glad we're talking about culture today, because a lot of times we think about structure in organizations, but as you know, culture is a moving target. Organizations change, communities change. I do want to give you a snapshot, though, of the makeup of the Indy Chamber organization. So prior to 2012, in that top bubble that just says Indy Chamber, the Indy Chamber existed for decades, doing membership and advocacy and events, and for much of Indianapolis's history, I think doing it quite well. Immediately below Indy Chamber, that bubble, is the Indy Partnership, which is the Regional Economic Development Corp, which was created by the private sector in the late 1990s for our 9-county region, Indianapolis. So familiar to what, as Mark was describing, the Albany region, we represent a 9-county region. Then the brand name Develop Indy is the City of Indianapolis Economic Development Corp. So Indianapolis is organized in 9 counties like a tic-tac-toe board, with Indianapolis, Marion County square in the middle. That middle of the tic-tac-toe board has half of the population, and then the adjacent counties around it have half the population. So it's a little bit unorthodox, because in 2012 they merged the Indy Partnership, the regional entity under the Indy Chamber, and the City of Indianapolis came along with its local economic development corp, Develop Indy, does a lot of urban redevelopment, brick and mortar economic development at the same time. And when I say we, you might be asking, who's we? This merger, which happened within 18 months of me joining the organization, was largely driven by a small group of companies. In fact, when I was in the mayor's office in Indianapolis, we called them the Gang of 8. The drug company Eli Lilly, a few of the large hospital corporations. And so I know these mergers, as I've learned from Mark and Jeff and others, these mergers come about in many different ways. In Indianapolis, there's no question that there was an influential group of companies that were big funders that got together. They approached the mayor of Indianapolis, the board chairs of a few organizations got together and said, you know, we see some synergies. We also don't want to be writing separate checks if things are going to be suboptimal. We think there's an advantage to things being brought together. And by the way, talk to me offline sometime. I'm not one that always thinks more centralized is better all the time. I think it's got to be what's right for the dynamics of your metro. I do think, though, that bringing together the Regional Economic Development Corp and the Indianapolis Urban Economic Development Corp under the Indy Chamber was advantageous for reasons that we can go into. On the left of the graph, the organization that prior to 2020, I think got the least amount of press, but they have been the superstars in 2020, is a small business and micro lending organization called Business Ownership Initiative, or BOI. And it includes several flagship programs, but two of the biggest are our Hispanic Business Council, Conexion, and our Central Indiana Women's Business Center. This group came under the Indy Chamber in the same window of time around 2012. And I spent my first few years, 2013, 14, 15, thinking, man, they do good work, but I'm not sure what do we do? How do we integrate them into economic development and the work of the chamber? This is another presentation for another time. In fact, I think our COO of Indy Chamber, Ian Nicolini, has given a presentation at ACCE. That organization, BOI, has been responsible for $22 million in very small business loans and grants since mid-March 2020. Its biggest year prior to 2020 was about $2.5 million of loans and grants out the door. So we're so fortunate, looking back, that they were merged under the Indy Chamber. So that at least gives you a snapshot of structurally what it looked like. And as I thought about this today, and as I listened to Mark, I thought, okay, we think about culture. I would be a little crass for a second. So a lot of chamber people think the economic development people don't understand what we do. They're just about wining and dining companies. They don't care about small business, and economic development people really don't understand politics. They think they're above politics, so they don't understand what we do. I hear a lot of that here. I don't know about you guys. On the economic development people side, it's like, chamber folks are just do their pancake breakfast and get into their local political squabbles. And what we do in economic development, chamber people will never understand because it's very strategic and very sophisticated, stuff like that. I don't know, that I heard a lot of that as we were trying to merge the organizations. Maybe you heard a lot of that too. I think both groups are wrong, by the way. So I know culturally there's a divide that we're all working with, as we try to get these folks of maybe different skills and backgrounds to work together. And I will say there are a few things in terms of culture became really important. And I will say developing a high performance culture that breaks down those silos post the merger is an ongoing process. I wish I could say we've got it down and we could write a book on it. We're a lot better in 2020 than we were in 2013, but we continue to really work on things and as problems emerge. I will say, as we looked at the culture, one of the things this has really improving the culture and getting these folks to work together has really forced me to do is first look at the bylaws. And that's not the first place where somebody like me is inclined to look. I mean, as Mark and Jeff know, my personality type is more, let's just get in there and we'll make it work. And what we discovered early on in 2013 and 14, especially as we tried to make these folks work together, is there were a lot of real concerns about economic development people being lobbied or economic development people being seen as associated with the political activities of the chamber. Would that somehow make them compromised out in the field? Would that somehow limit their effectiveness? So we did look at the bylaws to make sure that we had protections for the economic development folks to keep them out of the chamber's political activities. It was a small thing, but hugely important for us to address those in the bylaws so that the economic development people felt that they could be protected. And if that was even questioned publicly or privately, they had an answer, and that we could stand by to keep them out of the PAC activities and things like that of the chamber. We also have found that we got into like 2015, 2016, we still felt like a pretty siloed organization. I got a lot of feedback from my own employees. I'd get feedback from board members. And I really feel strongly that we've got to manufacture sometimes and create these cross-functional opportunities for folks to work together, call them foxhole experiences. Some of them happen to us. Some of them are things that we just have to create and manufacture. The biggest one that we're in the middle of in 2020 is this. In mid-March, when the coronavirus reached our community, same time as reaching a lot of your communities, we have about 57 employees across the organization. We called over 50 of them literally into the kitchen area of our organization. We said, okay, we don't know where this is going, but we've just had some major events canceled, and that means some restaurants are going to cancel. So as of Monday morning, we're all going to be working from home, and our the BOI organization that you see on the left of the graph that had about 13 people. We said our small business services team is going to be about 40 people on Monday morning, and we're all going to be working from home. We're all going to have assignments, and we'll talk about them, and you'll get your assignments. And we would not have been able to do 22 million in various loans and grants with our 13-person BOI small business services staff. There's no way. So that means that, if I'm doing the math, 27 people from chamber, local economic development, regional economic development got cross-trained, and for several months all they were doing was small business services. If you had told me that this was going to happen, not just the global pandemic, but what we were going to do with our organization, I would have thought that was going to be really hard. It was going to be a real downer. It's been the most bonding experience that we have ever had. And I think part of the reason is it's given people a way to break out of their routine. So like the events, a lot of folks from the events teams got cross-trained on small business services. For a while, the transactional economic development was not as much as happening there. As those folks were doing small business services. They've been able to learn new things. Even though we're working virtually, they're interacting with teams they don't really necessarily work with day to day. And they're getting that personal interaction with small businesses. Even though it's a heartbreaking time for so many businesses in our communities, they're really feeling like they're making a difference. And it made me think, if I only could have manufactured this type of a foxhole experience before, how great would it have been? The last thing I'll say before handing it off to Jeff and hearing what Jeff wants to share is there's a bigger thing happening that I think is driving this kind of cultural integration within our organizations. And go back to the economic development people don't like the chamber people and vice versa, and that whole thing. Economic development in our communities is becoming less transactional and less just about the deal. It's becoming more human capital centric. Chamber lobbying too is changing. I mean, chamber lobbying is changing just in my last 7 years. And the chamber executives that I admire the most, including the two on the panel with me today, becoming much more human capital centric, and these more traditional issues of regulation and tax, those things still matter, but it's becoming more human capital centric. So as both economic development and chamber lobbying and the chamber business of becoming much more interested in quality of life issues and the entrepreneurial environment sort of converge, I think it presents a great opportunity for our organizations. And the other thing is, it's not lost on me or Mark or Jeff that we are white guys in an industry that is making efforts and needs to get a lot more diverse. We're finding that through more of that broadbanding and more of that ability to train people, it's making us more attractive to diverse candidates and younger diverse candidates who want to join the organization, who want to do what we do. And want to be a part of our organization, but don't want to get pigeonholed just as an economic development specialist, or don't want to get pigeonholed just as supporting the lobbying team. And that is something that's making a huge difference too. Still got a long way to go, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here with Jeff and Mark today, and I'll pause there.
Thanks so much, Michael. And now, Jeff, we'll move on to you.
Great, thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you again today and to share the stage with as two of my favorites as well. I've learned a lot from these gentlemen. I'll probably mention Mark especially once or twice because I have the honor of holding a position that he used to hold, and much of the good work that's happened here were from seeds that Mark had planted a really long time ago, and I've had a chance to help harvest, I guess, while I'm here, and I'm forever grateful for his leadership here in our community. And Michael as well for he's just down the road and he's a great sounding board, and really enjoy working with both. I just want to give you a quick frame of reference for our geography. I'm in South Bend, Indiana. We're about where the yellow star is there in the middle. We're really part of a region that has about 9 counties that with almost 900,000 people in it. We're really the county seat, the media center, and it's a 2-state. Our focus is really on St. Joseph, Berrien, and Cass counties, but we also launched the regional partnership that includes Marshall, Kosciuszko, and Fulton counties there. So we operate a broad geography. Mark, in his days, had really started to coin the idea of regional prosperity, and we've kind of built upon that and worked to cement relationships across each of those lines. And over the years, have affected some mergers that have helped us accomplish that. If you'll advance slide, please. So, and as you know, and this is more just from my own, frame of reference, but yours as well too. These, as you're thinking about this, contemplating, they all obviously can take many forms, whether it be another chamber, an ED group, CVB, business associations. You have to figure out, what's right for you. We have we're a joint chamber, ED and CVB. I had a chance to add ED to the mix several years ago, and as part of a merger. And now we have merged with another chamber across the state line as well. But it looks different, I think, wherever you're at. And I think both Michael and Mark mentioned that you've got to figure out what's right and where those chances are for you to find success and find those willing partners and strike up small partnerships and then build upon those. And I used to tell our ED folks many years ago, if we're not going to be figure this out, somebody else is going to figure out this for us. And they could never really get that in their mind. And what happened was somebody else figured it out for them, and they're no longer here. And I don't, I'm not trying to be coy or callous about that, but in this collaborative environment, there isn't any room for the chamber and the ED group to be competing organizations. Those should be partnering organizations. Our business leaders recognize that and led to a merger several years ago. And I think the biggest thing is we really have to listen to our community and our constituents. I think listening is one of those skills that seems to be so lost this day and age. And so I think that's been a really key piece of our success, is listening to our constituents, our stakeholders, our board, all the folks in key leadership positions to make sure we were meeting the need in the community. If you could advance slide, please. So just to mention here, so under our brand, not only the Chamber, but the Visitor Bureau, Visit South Bend, Mishawaka, our economic development brand, the South Bend Region Economic Development, and then most recently in Niles, Michigan, which is across the state line, the Greater Niles Chamber of Commerce. And that one, we did two things up there. First, we merged the Chamber and the ED group, and then we brought that group in with us as well. So we have been kind of navigating those. And I think what we recognized there in particular was they're a small organization that had a hard time getting the funding they needed to sort of meet the demand in the community, and decided that partnering with a neighboring organization or community might be the best way to go about. The business leaders there reached out to us and said, what about partnering with you guys? You have been around for a while. You have a nice reputation. You've been here 100 years. And would there be opportunities, because you are the big player in our marketplace, could we find some synergies there? As Mark mentioned, I think, such an important piece here is to make sure folks don't feel like they're losing in these scenarios. And so Niles and Buchanan, Michigan, where we're also at, are two communities, for example, that we wanted to make sure kept their identity while at the same time centralizing a number of the services that they get. So in our mind, it was, I always use the branch bank model. Can we centralize certain services in the back office, and then can we have a sales office that still delivers service in those communities? But people aren't as worried about where the newsletter comes from, where the bill comes from, HR, IT, all the things that a bank, for example, centralizes in a home office, was sort of the concept that we had here. And it's a model that's worked pretty well for us. We've allowed Niles and Buchanan to keep their identity. We still have an active board of directors. We still have advisory councils up in those communities. But from the outside appearance, it still appears very much like it's their own, Chamber of Commerce, and we still operate it very much that way. But we have found the efficiencies in centralizing those things, behind the scenes. If you advance slide, please. So I just want to touch on maybe a couple of things that we learned along the way. And our focus today is really on staff, and whether it's our ED merger from a couple of years ago or the most recent merger, it was really important to us that it be more than just a merger on paper. What happens sometimes in these, I think everybody, goes into one space, and the ED folks sit on one end of the building, the chamber sits at the other end, and there's very little interaction. So we had to make sure that we were very intentional about integrating our staff together, forcing collisions, encouraging collaboration. We, even in our organizational chart here, we made sure that that like people were reporting to like people. So for example, I had a graphic designer in the CBB and a graphic designer in ED. Those two should be sitting right next to each other and should be part of the graphic design team, but not specifically for specific clients, if you will. And so we had to just be really intentional about those. And we also knew that sitting them next to each other, making them part of the team, being part of conversations, all that was going to help them integrate as a staff. We worked to integrate our budgets, our strategic plan. Everybody from all three of those became part of the strategic plan. Our operations really had to change so that we didn't function inside of our four walls like three separate organizations. And that's something that has to keep happening. We have to be really intentional about that because we all sort of move back to our normal worlds, but we've had some success there so far. Internal champions are absolutely critical. And then I think the communication one is perhaps the biggest one. This is like a relationship, and I think about it with my own wife every day. Like I think she knows I love her, right? But I should tell her every day as well too. And I got to communicate often and be overly communicative with it, and similar with staff and stuff. So we just got to make sure everybody's on the same page, set clear expectations, and then I think the big thing is get the right people on the bus. The truth is, as you merge, some people aren't going to fit very well, and you're going to have to make some changes. And in both cases, we had to make some changes at the end because folks just didn't fit in. You give people a chance to be a champion, to get on the bus, to be part of the team, and if they don't, you ultimately got to make a tough decision, and we made some tough decisions there. If you go one more slide, please. And I'll just sort of say quickly as I'm wrapping up, be ready for, some might lose their jobs. And as we found efficiencies, we found we didn't need as many people as we used to. We tried to repurpose them, put them in other areas, but we also had some that didn't fit very well. And so I think, we have got to think business-like, not nonprofit-like, and get those right people there. We had some investors who wanted to invest less, in particular, they used to invest in the chamber, they used to invest in economic development. Now they want to make one investment at a smaller level. People aren't in a hurry to invest more money, and so our job has been to find more partners to replace that, and so that's been just one of those things we've been very conscious of, and overall have done really well with, but we had to be really prepared for that at the beginning. Back to personnel, some aren't going to like it, and I think you really have just got to keep working with them, give them opportunities, set clear expectations for them. A lot of them are going to give you reasons it won't work, and Michael was sharing some great examples that I heard those same things about this will never work because you can't put ED and chamber and stuff together. And how's the city who gives you an ED investment gonna behave when you also do candidate endorsements and such? So we just kind of plowed forward on those and said we'll figure those out along the way. I think there's too many what if scenarios. If we'd have been sitting here a decade from now still contemplating what ifs if we hadn't been willing to push forward. So you've got to push forward on those. And again, back to my earlier thought, you got to be thinking about this, or someone else is going to think about this for you, and so be on the front end of being proactive. And then I think at the end of the day, success is going to make your phone ring. And so we've tried this in Niles, for example, as a small example, with the idea that that this could lead to more partnerships. We have 47 cities and towns, and kind of the geography that we serve, that's an awful lot. We'd like to sort of have a more consolidated chamber ED function here, and we think we've built a model that will help us continue to expand into other jurisdictions in our area where they need that. So I'm going to wrap that up, my comments, and always happy, as the other two are as well too, to chat at any time. So even after the call today, feel free to reach out to any of us, but I'll turn back over to Susan.
All right, well, thank you, all of you, Jeff, Michael, and Mark, for those presentations and insights on your merger histories and challenges. Folks, if you have questions, now is the time to type them into the question box, and I will go ahead and read them to the panel. So just do that, and we'll just go through as many questions as we can. So first question is for anyone on the panel. Has anyone had experience with a chamber and an ED org being rolled up under an umbrella organization such as an alliance or partnership. So looks like anyone can pipe in on that.
This is Mark. I think essentially that's what each of us have done. You know, that whether the organization, you know, in the case with us, we created a new organizational name to do it. In the case with Indy and South Bend, they didn't, but essentially that's really what it is. And I think as we all said, there are certain nuances that go with it. But I think at the end of the day, I think we'll realize there's much more to be gained than there is to be lost through that.
Okay. Folks, if you have any more questions, go ahead and type them in. I did have a question for Jeff about your graphic designer example. Did you have, I would imagine that if you have two folks that are doing similar things, one for the ED organization, one for the chamber, you're putting them together. How do you make that work so that they aren't competing, that they are both have impactful projects and contributions, but I would imagine there could be some difficulties when you're grouping like folks with like roles together from different organizations.
Yeah, we really approach it like an ad agency that's there to sort of serve the needs of the client. So really try to prioritize, kind of what needs to get out the door now and have them focus on that rather than on the specific, one platform or the others. Obviously, they have some expertise with their particular platforms, but we really have just tried to integrate them across the different platforms into what's going on. So again, they're like an ad agency, and we're hiring the agency, if you will, to do this or that. Similar with kind of our marketing, our communications, our social media, our event planning. Again, no sense of I have a chamber event planner. The CVB does some events. I don't need two event planners, and so how do I sort of the same skill goes into planning the economic development annual luncheon and the chamber annual luncheon, and obviously we still do two, but just we just had to be really intentional about erasing job descriptions, kind of like Michael did in the pandemic, and to say, hey, it's all hands on deck here, and whatever needs to get done and get out the door, that's your job, and it isn't really as oriented towards kind of one function or another.
Sure. Another question. This is a question around whether someone can get a copy of your bylaws or I guess merger agreements or partnership agreements, whatever they're called, so that folks can take a look. And I know that Jen is going to be talking a little bit about some of the examples that we have here at ACCE, but if any of you guys are willing to share, if you haven't already, you might have already sent them to us. That would be awesome. You can just send them to me, and I will post them with the recording, and Jen will also post them on our resource page.
One of the controversial ones around bylaws. So yes, absolutely. For chambers that have a PAC. So, well, let me back up. The earlier question about an alliance or partnership. Some of it's semantics. I know the structure that I'm the most familiar with, both in our organization, talking to others, is an executive committee and a chairman of the organization to whom economic development councils and other groups roll up, so that really the buck stops with the chair and that group of the organization and the CEO by extension. One wrinkle in that, and this is something I think everybody just has to do what's right for them, is we labored over this for a while. We wanted to keep a PAC. We wanted to keep a PAC that could endorse candidates, and that PAC maintained the ability to make those endorsements without rolling it up, to the top, through the process. Now, virtually every other decision across economic development, former chamber functions, this is kind of new chamber, budgeting and things like that get rolled up, but there will always be wrinkles. And so for us, attention to the bylaws was really important, because it was really important to our board for the PAC to maintain that level of independence, so it could make those calls where necessary.
And I think to build on that comment, and if I wasn't clear in mine, when you saw all those boxes and I said they're legal entities, they're not independent legal entities. So in the case with all of those organizations, while they're incorporated, one of the first things that the bylaws say that those entities, even those chambers have one member, and that one member is the Capital Region Chamber. So that parent group, while we have those boards, if you really read the bylaws, they're really advisory in nature. The real governance is one organization.
I'm really glad you made that distinction, Mark, because on the Indianapolis org chart, same thing. Those are formerly independent organizations. Now they are programs of the Indy Chamber organization, so similar to what Mark described. Now, I know that in creating successful post-merger culture, sometimes folks get hung up on brand names, and sometimes having separate brands for the organization can reinforce those silos. And I think that's just something, I don't have strong opinions on, sometimes it's advantageous to consolidate under one brand. Sometimes there are strategic reasons to keep, I think in the Albany region case, to keep, local brands alive. For us, keeping the Indy Partnership brand and a couple of the others was important to board leadership and investors to show that there is a strategic focus. And we again, that becomes like Jeff, you can't over communicate this enough. That becomes a part of the internal communication plan. We're all a part of the same organization, and yet Sarah over here leads the Indy Partnership organization, and they need to fly the Indy Partnership brand for these strategic reasons, but we're all the same. But I appreciate the distinction, because similar with us, these are not separate legal entities.
I would just add that, and I think it evolves over time. Like, critical when we merged ED and Chamber was the separate brands, and as the last 8 years now have progressed on that, the one brand, the ED brand, is getting closer and closer to being retired. It's interesting. As a CEO, I have about 4 different business cards, for example, and 4 different email addresses, depending on who I'm connecting with, and then which was really important at the beginning but over time, as we've evolved, people have come to know that's part of the chamber. And although we work, we have the same challenge as Michael with the PAC and endorsing candidates. However, in our community, it just continues to evolve, and we're seeing less need for those other brands.
Okay. Well, thank you for those comments. And Jen has been chatting out links to each of your chamber websites, as well as other information. So take a look there. You can get more information right from the chat on the organizations of these CEOs here on this panel today. I am going to go ahead. If there's no more questions, there's one comment here. Let me see. We just have a comment that this is inspiring as we look to the future. I would agree with that. Thank you for recommending that we do what's right and allow like-minded groups to self-identify. This will conserve effort and energy for other more meaningful work. So
I want to, Susan, if I can make a comment there, with our organization and with others. I know that sometimes both among as staffs of organizations approach potential mergers and even board members, there's a lot of fear around, well, are we being pushed into doing this because companies don't want to invest as much money? I'll tell you, in our case, funding went down in the first 2 years. After 5 years, funding was way up, and we've been incredibly blessed. I'm talking close of 2014, our annual budget was around $8 million. When 2020 closes, it'll be, including foundation, it'll be around $14.5 million. There wasn't any one move that did that. We've been incredibly blessed. So I do think there is it takes some time to sort that out. I think in the short term, I do think companies are motivated to support mergers because they think they're going to have to, they hope they're going to invest less money. There are scenarios, though, where that cross-pollination of particularly economic development people and the chamber people can help you compete for bigger and bigger opportunities. That certainly has been the case with us in servicing small businesses. Every chamber is different, but I know there's some of that fear that takes place, and certainly there are short-term losses, but I know of more chambers than not who have been on a similar horizon for us in terms of how the funding increased, maybe not overnight, but over time. I don't know, Mark or Jeff, if you have a similar experience.
Yeah, I just say exactly my experience, and we merged in 2012. The next 2 years presented those challenges because of that suggestion. I used to write a $25,000 check here and a $25,000 check here, and now I'd like to write a $30,000, total. And so my net loss between the two, but yeah, now 8 years later, we're back to where we exceeding where we were at the beginning as well. So it just takes some time to get there.
Well, and I think it's also in your communication. So like for us, like when the different chambers came together, we identified through, again, that research process, we were doing our discovery, how many shared members we had between the organizations. And we made sure that we talked to them about why we were doing this. Again, we weren't doing it for efficiencies. We weren't doing it because of back office operations. We were doing it because we're a regional economy and we want to be able to compete as a region. And so really the comment that I would always make is, if you believe this makes sense, we can't have less capacity tomorrow than we had yesterday. So we really asked everyone to write the same, you can send us one check, but we want it to be equal to what those two checks had been. And our success rate from the chamber side, when we've done it now 3 different times, has been extremely high. Now we're doing the economic development one, and if you could pick timing, I would never pick timing to do this during a pandemic. However, there's been other times that this always fell short and it didn't happen. So you have to do it when the opportunity is right for other reasons. And so, I know we're going to lose some money this time. My hope is that we could quickly show the value, show the impact, and I hope, like my colleagues, to bring it back soon. And hopefully we can minimize. When I was first contacted last spring from the chair of the Economic Development Organization, who happens to be a past chair of the chamber, we have a really good relationship, and I remember saying to him directly, if the reason that you're exploring this is because people are sick of writing checks, we can't do it. Because if we do it together and you're going to act like you have an economic development organization, but you're not funding it properly, it's just a charade, and we can't do that.
One thing I will say, and this is why, and I imagine a lot of the folks on the webinar today already know this, but it took me a couple of years to figure out I shouldn't spin my wheels. I should just pick up the phone and call Mark or call Jeff or call somebody else. Because when you're in the merger and when you're in it, and the personalities and the local politics, you think it's something that only you have dealt with, and there's a 95% chance that somebody else has dealt with the same thing, And so picking up the phone, calling colleagues, you get a variety of perspectives. I know it's very obvious, but I'd say save yourself the time. The ACCE network is built for questions like this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael, for mentioning that. And Mark, I love your point that if you believe in the mission, if you believe in the goal of a regional economy, then don't give us less money. That makes sense. And so congratulations to all of you on the success. There was one more question on, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but it basically wants you to talk about streams of funding in your merged organizations, and particularly government money involved. I don't know if that's relevant to any of you guys.
So streams of funding, slight decrease in traditional membership funding. We're like what Mark Eagan said, we anticipate that being lower in 2021. Because of the merger, it put us in a stronger position to go solicit from suburban municipalities, and that was a big increase. We've got eight municipalities. We're trying to get to 13 who are funding the Regional Economic Development Corp. It made us much more competitive for corporate foundations, and then for one big one that we're very blessed to have, the Lilly Endowment in Indianapolis. I think my friend Brad Klopfenstein is on here, who runs one of our regional chambers, so he knows well about the Lilly Endowment. And so we put us in a great position, and some of these corporate foundations really liked the convergence of economic development and some of the policy work, not the electoral politics work, but a lot of the policy work that we were able to do. So, and I don't, we've got some things up our sleeve for 2021 in recovery. We're hoping to increase that membership funding base, but the biggest increases that have made of the last few years have been project-based requests through corporate foundations and philanthropy, and it's made us more competitive for that. Not overnight; it took a few years.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your questions, everyone, and obviously, Mark, Michael, and Jeff, your presentations, and as Michael mentioned, ACCE we are here to help and facilitate conversations between you and others who have done this work and are thinking about it. So I'm going to actually turn things over for a few minutes to Jen, who's going to talk a little bit about the resources that that mostly she and her team have pulled together on mergers and alliances and partnerships. And so, Jen, I'm going to pass things over to you, and I can also make you the presenter, so just let me know when you're ready for that.
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen and you'll see the Alliances, Mergers, and Partnerships resource guide, which I've also put the link to in our chat. We have a number of resources available to you on the topic we discussed today, and they're all collected in this central place in ACCE's knowledge base. This resource guide is available on our website, and it features a framework to guide you through the considerations of merging or aligning with another chamber or organization. So first, I'm just going to tell you quickly how to get here from our homepage. From our homepage, you can just click on Information, and then you'll be taken to the Information homepage. And right in the middle of it are our list of resource guides, and the first one is our Alliances, Mergers, and Partnerships guide. And on this front page, there's links to Chamber Executive Magazine articles, prior webinars presented by expert peers in this area, and examples of a variety of structures. And of course, today's webinar will be posted on this resource guide. Under the Working Framework and Considerations tab, you'll see an outline of steps and considerations of the process. And this includes well thought out advice from mentors, including the ones who are on the call today, who've gone through this process, and examples from peer chambers, and as well as vetted outside sources. You can see that the last step of the process listed here is, of course, integrating team culture, people, and more that we spoke about today. And the organizations of today's three guests are all represented on the examples of each structure tab. And there's a lot of other examples to peruse as well, including ones someone was asking about consolidations between chambers and EDOs, and there's a whole list of those as well. And then if you're interested in taking a deeper dive into regionalism, foundations and governance, or strategic planning, there's links to those resources on these topics as well. And we continue to update this guide, continually, as this topic will, just keep evolving in the chamber world. So keep checking back for updates. And as has been mentioned by our guest today, as well as Susan, we can connect you with a peer mentor if you're in need of one-on-one advice. We've got a list of merger mentors as well as consultants. So you can email askacce@acce.org to be connected with a peer. We've also got an online submit a question form here. The emailing or using the form, it all comes to the same place, and we try and get to your requests within 24 to 48 business hours. So feel free also to peruse other resource guides that we have in our knowledge base. We've got a whole bunch of relevant topics. These are continually updated with new resources as we develop them. So back to you, Susan.
All right, thank you, Jen. I'll see if I can show my screen. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you being here with us today. And thanks to Mark, Michael, Jeff, and Jen. I have contact information for our presenters right here. The handout that we've uploaded to the webinar panel does have live links in it, so you can email away. So just a reminder that this webinar was recorded, and I will have it up on our webinar page most likely tomorrow, for sure on Monday. And I will have any other resources that we have posted along with it. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you on the next ACC webinar.